You're listening to Weird and Dead, the paleontology podcast that tells evolution's most embarrassing and bizarre stories. I'm Megan Wetherell.
And I'm Amy Atwater, and we're two living scientists who are weirdly excited about dead things.
On this episode, we talk about the evidence for narcissism in deep time and, relatedly, how bodies tend to float in the water when they die.
We promise those are related. We also discuss how graceful you need to be or not to be to continue your species, aka get laid for evolution.
As always, this episode talks about gross things, in particular the things that happen to dead bodies post-mortem. So please read the content warnings in the description. Also, this content is not for children, unlike Amy's new book, which is great, and you should go buy a copy. So, we're going to start off today's story with a lovely conversation about Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, aka the park in Nevada that, despite having driven by it twice, even though it's in the middle of fucking nowhere, I have never actually been able to go into because it's been closed every single time that I've gone there.
I'm so sorry.
So
it's so cool.
I know.
I've been there.
I know you've been there. So if you're driving in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, you might drive past this place and it may or may not be open. But Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park is a theoretically, so I hear, very cool site in Nevada where you have a whole bunch of Shoniosaurus, which are these really big ichthyosaurs, like multiple meters long,
The
like
biggest.
Yeah, some big daddy ichthyosaurs, and they are in the the Lunning formation. And as it turns out, probably not big daddies, probably big mommy ichthyosaurs.
Aw, I can relate. Ugh.
Big, beautiful mommies.
That's right.
And the actual state park encapsulates Quarry 2, which is one of the many, many places that you find these ichthyosaurs throughout the Lunning Formation. I guess there's something like, I think almost 100 ichthyosaur individuals throughout the Lunning Formation, and a recent study demonstrated that they're actually kind of throughout time. So this stuff in Quarry 2, there's 7 individuals, I think, that are right next to each other, and they all probably died around the same time, which is exciting for a variety of reasons.
Not for them.
Well, it doesn't matter what they think is exciting. They died. Yeah. Well, and so that has been kind of the historic question, right? Was it just a bad day? Was it bad luck? Initially, when these things were discovered, it was assumed to be strandings, that basically these ichthyosaurs got stranded in shallow water. Turns out, probably not that shallow of water. There's some arguments as to how deep it is, but it's probably, it was right at the bottom of what they call storm base. So if you look at the Lunning Formation, all of the little shells have been moved and imbricated. So they're in line, they're all in the same orientation through water movement, which is important, as it turns out, for this whole story. And the ichthyosaurs are in basically that section. So probably not that shallow, probably around 500 meters to maybe a little more, depending on who you talk to. It's pretty deep. Yeah.
That's deep to me. I
know. I don't want to go that deep.
As someone who's afraid of the ocean, that's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, that's true. I don't want to not be able to touch the bottom. Snorkeling has not gone well for me historically. It's always jellyfish stinging me, fish attacking me, or dead salmon.
No, yeah. Kelp. Just disrespectful kelp.
It's the only form of kelp is disrespectful.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, snorkeling's great out there. You guys go do it. We don't like it.
Yeah. So the Lunning Formation, not shallow like we initially thought. So then the follow-up thought for how do you get these dead ichthyosaurs, these massive mommies in the same spot, how do you get them dying theoretically all around the same time? So the next thing was, okay, the classic, how do you kill lots of things in the water? Poison their asses using algae. So algal blooms was the next kind of iteration.
I was like, who is going to poison them if not man?
The dinosaurs.
Man was not there yet.
No, it was
algae,
plants. Algae, right? Yeah. So the next idea was algae, although that has also been overturned. There's not When you see an algae bloom in the water, there's a couple things that you expect to see in the geologic record, including like a thick organic layer and mercury spikes, I guess. I don't know why. but apparently mercury spikes. And neither of those things exist in the Lenning Formation. And also, turns out the ichthyosaurs and Corey too may have died together. Shit tons of other ichthyosaurs accumulated over 100,000 to 1,000,000 years in the Lenning Formation. So lots and lots of time averaging. Lots of big ichthyosaurs dying in the same region for hundreds of thousands of years, potentially. Probably not algae coming through time to kill every single one of them. So what is the next most natural and obvious theory, Amy,
I know where this is
for how these animals are dying? If you said, well, obviously it's a giant kraken making a self-portrait with dead ichthyosaurs, well, you are right that was the next theory. So
Next idea. Parsimony out the fucking window. Let's not talk about like the geographical reconstruction, right? Like, or what physical constraints are happening to make it so this place is being selected for. No. Vain Kraken. Kraken was just like, this song was written by me.
Right. But not just vain, Amy. Like, this kraken had a sense of self. This kraken had artistic spirit and integrity.
You are describing every narcissist I know. Okay.
That's true. Narcissistic giant kraken. So this is a story today, both of real theories proposed by
hypotheses.
A hypothesis does not mean that it makes sense, is a good idea, is valid in any way, shape, or form. And we're also going to talk about how just because they wrote a paper on it does not mean that that paper was peer-reviewed or is in any way something you should consider more valid than just their words. Same with abstracts, because initially, when this theory was brought to the public's eye, this was in 2011, and it was at the Geological Society of America.
I remember where I was.
Were you at this GSA, this meeting?
I wasn't at this GSA, but I just have such distinctive memories of that abstract coming out and just the ridicule and the absurdity, and then the conversation about what I think you're going to talk about, which is about GSA and that they essentially accept everything.
Yes. So, Geological Society of America, if you want to go and present your theory, regardless of whether it's good or not,
young Earth, flood,
creationism, flood geology, all of that stuff is accepted at GSA without any criteria. So they don't reject anything as long as it's about
They don't want to get sued, y'all. They get money from the government, so
you have to pay. You have to pay
liability
to submit an abstract. So like, there's literally no reason for them to reject your stuff, because you give them money to publish your abstract, and then you give them money to attend and talk about your science. So yeah, there's some financial problems with the way that these meetings are run, but this is a reminder that just because it appears to be in a big publication like GSA, that doesn't mean it's peer reviewed, right? That doesn't mean that it's something that you should just accept at face value. So in 2011, this gentleman, I have read his name 1,000 times. I'm going to just call him Mark McMenamins because I don't remember. I confuse that and Mark McMaron, which I know is a different person who I think is a real person. So Mark McMenamin, might be McMenamins.
Yeah.
Which is a restaurant.
Missing McMenamin. How's his tater tots?
Presumably really good. Sweet potato fries.
I do love their tater tots.
Screw their tater tots. Their sweet potato fries are so good. They should sponsor us. I would talk about their sweet potato fries for years.
And like their beer, but whatever.
Yeah, whatever. So Mark McMenamin presented this in 2011 at GSA, and his theory was that these dead ichthyosaurs looked like the tentacles of a giant kraken. It has to be giant because these ichthyosaurs are like short school bus size. Like they're pretty fucking big. They're multiple meters long. So it has to be a giant kraken. Let me go ahead and before we move on any further, I think I want to show you what he was seeing. All right, so we're going to take a look together.
The human brain is amazing at finding patterns in things, whether or not
so true.
They're there.
Yeah. Amy, for the people who are still listening to this, can you describe what it is you're seeing?
I'm looking at a picture of, it just looks like wrinkly, rumply, I don't know where I'm going with this, like texture to it. You can see that there are some distinctively round areas, which I know are the ichthyosaur vertebrae, so the backbones. And then there's kind of some like linear features coming out from that might be ribs or something like that. And they're arranged in a way where they're next to each other, and it kind of looks like a plesiosaur paddle, on a smaller scale, like with those kind of bones next to each other. Yeah, they're kind of spooning, hanging out.
Mark McMenamin presented basically this picture and a couple of other pictures, because if you look at the vertebrae of the ichthyosaurs in Quarry 2, so ichthyosaur vertebrae, if you're not familiar with them, they basically look like little hockey pucks. They don't have a lot of, it's increased flexibility. They're in the water. They don't need to be able to be real stiff and rigid. So they have just hockey pucks for vertebrae. Yeah. And instead of being in like a domino series of hockey pucks.
Or like a sleeve of Oreos. They don't look like that.
Yeah. They look like what would happen if you took a sleeve of Oreos and left them on a table, which is that some of them would roll and then land on their back. So every single one of these hockey pucks is facing upwards, and there's two separate rows where they're alternating because, as most people think, probably they just rolled out of a sequence and rolled next to one another. But if you're Mark McMenamin, you think that this looks so much like the suckers on a tentacle of a kraken that,
oh my God,
this is a self-portrait.
But of just their tentacles.
Well, yes. And
it gets worse.
I want to also give you what is the real reason that these ichthyosaurs look like this. So I'm going to stop sharing now. So very recently, there was a paper published where they looked at the sedimentology of the Lunning Formation. They looked at the Quarry 2 stuff. They looked at all of this different stuff. They figured out that probably the water depth was around 500 meters. They were the people who said that, okay, well, everything is oriented. So it's right at about storm base. It's like you have some water moving it, but not a ton. And they went through and they looked at all of these ichthyosaurs, and they found that even though they're kind of deposited throughout time, so this is clearly like a long-term process that is happening, you don't find a whole lot of other shit with them. So it's pretty much just ichthyosaurs and things that these ichthyosaurs probably weren't eating, like ammonites. And not very many of those either. It's really mostly ichthyosaurs, which is kind of odd. But you don't find subadult ichthyosaurs. You only find fully adult ichthyosaurs and like babies or embryos. So
with mama.
Yes, with mama / coming out of mama.
Double stuffed Oreo.
Oh God.
Ew.
These researchers theorized that probably what happened was that this was not a breeding ground, but a having babies ground. This was where Shonisaurus came. Yeah, a nursery, basically. This is where they came to have their babies because there's no real reason for them to go into low productivity waters. Like, why would you go someplace that has no food? And why would these animals be going there consistently? Well, if you look at modern whales, this is something that mother whales will do when they're about to give birth. They go to low productivity areas that are relatively warm still so that they can give birth without having to deal with fucking sharks, basically. Right? Like there's no other predators because there's nothing for them to eat. So they're more likely to be able to give birth in peace, which would explain why all of these animals were there.
Nice.
As for the animals in Quarry 2, they took a look at them and they decided that, like everybody else has decided except for Mark McMenamin. Probably what happened was that these animals were not buried right away, that these animals died, they went to the bottom, and then they probably bloated a little bit and then floated a little bit. So for a period of time, you probably had 6 or 7 ichthyosaurs bobbing around dead in the water, rotting.
It's like fucking salmon.
Yes, basically.
Like salmon run of rotting recently. Ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So they think that for whatever reason, this group of, I keep saying 6 or 7, I should just go and look, but whatever. This group of ichthyosaurs in particular, probably maybe there was an illness or something. They died for whatever reason. It was just a bad year. And they didn't get covered up right away. They probably were decomposing a little bit, maybe floating a little bit, which is why they are kind of in the same orientation. So all of them are kind of facing the same direction. Imbricated just the same way as the shells are in the sediments. And when they deposited, as they rotted, there were probably some cross currents that just knocked their vertebrae out of alignment. And that's their explanation, which, yeah, that makes sense. Other than the horrifying nightmare image of 6 dead ichthyosaurs bobbing at the bottom of the sea. And other studies have demonstrated that ichthyosaurs will lose articulation before they lose completeness. So when ichthyosaurs are rotting, they have a tendency for their bones to come apart before they kind of just disappear. So these ichthyosaurs aren't perfectly complete, but most of their body parts are there, which suggests that they probably were somewhere in that rotting phase when they were actually covered. So it makes sense with other ichthyosaurs as well. And yeah, there probably was a little bit of bloat and float, which is how this whole thing is shoehorned into this episode. And I would not say that the Berlin Ichthyosaurs are the classic bloat and float example. But Amy, you're going to tell us about that classic bloat and float example. Are you looking for the best possible dinosaur or fossil-related book for a kid in your life? Amy wrote one. It's got these amazing touchable illustrations, and while it is completely child-friendly, some of our favorite not-so-appropriate animals are hidden throughout. Get your copy of The Fossil Keeper's Treasure today, wherever you buy books.
Want more weird and dead content and you don't want to wait? Or maybe you don't want to hear ads like this? Head on over to our Patreon for exclusive content, early ad-free episodes, and so much more. For only $5 a month, you too can hear our outtakes, exclusive episodes, and the stuff we cut for time, and also just because it was too much for the general public. That's right, Megan. Like doing my best newscaster voice. Yeah, I got stuck with dinosaurs this week, but it was so much fun. It was super worth it. I did. Yeah, so the classic, we wanted to talk about bloat and float because it's fucking weird and dead. Like, it's perfect for us. It's a natural pairing. Also, I can relate. Who can't? Like, I get, I was like, yeah, it's bloat and float. No, it's not like a bunch of like pregnant ladies like bobbing down a river, but apparently a bunch of dead pregnant ichthyosaurs bobbing on. Because that's what I was thinking is really funny is like you get so bloated when you're pregnant. To be bloated in death is kind of rude. It's like, come on, have I not like paid my dues? Has my body not already been disgusting? I don't know.
How much bigger can we get here?
Well, yeah, why are we going to really test that? So one of the best examples of bloat and float is with ankylosaur dinosaurs. And that's what we're going to talk about today for most of my time. So ankylosaurs are the armored dinosaurs. They're on all fours. They had all the protective plates and armor on their back. They kind of looked like a weird glyptodont turtle kind of thing, but a dinosaur. I call them pissed off coffee tables. They're at the right height to just do mad damage to the shins. Not that any of like humans or coffee tables coexisted with ankylosaurs, so don't get it twisted. So should probably clarify so that Mark McMenamin man doesn't try to come for me. Okay, so what is bloat and float? I really liked their definition of this. So I read this incredible paper that was looking at this long time kind of known idea, like Sternberg, who's a classic paleontologist from 1900s, and even Nobska, our guy from like the early 1900s, like they were like, you know, we find Ankylosaurs belly up a lot. We find their bones like this. So it just became a part of the literature, but it was really anecdotal. And so this paper, which is by Mallon et al., we've talked about one of Jordan Mallon's papers before. This one was just as satisfying, if not way fucking funny. It was clearly written with joy. Like you could tell that they enjoyed this project. It is so stupid what they did. And it's freaking great. So they were like, okay, ankylosaurs are thought to be preserved belly up on their backs more often than not. And it's oftentimes pointed to, so the paper first was, does this actually show, does this hold up statistically? Do ankylosaurs preserve better on their backs? And then the second part is why, with an emphasis on testing this, is it the bloat and float hypothesis, which folks have just been like, oh, it's ankylosaurs. They just like toppled over and were like, help me, and went out to sea. And it was just like a total disaster. And that's kind of what bloat and float has to do with. So it's like if an animal dies, maybe it was attacked by a predator, maybe it just died of old age, maybe it died from who the fuck knows what, something collapsed around it, like it's maybe it's a burrow, and then perhaps that carcass would have been washed into an adjacent river or stream or some sort of water source. And a lot of what they're called fluvial deltaic environments. So we're talking about river systems that are shooting out into the ocean. So like think of the Mississippi coming out of New Orleans and Louisiana. So when you're close enough to the ocean, sometimes when you get your dead body gets into a stream, it will go all the way out to the ocean, especially if you're nice and bloated from your decomposition of your internal organs. And if you just swell up like a cute little rotting, disgusting balloon, you're like floating around and and you're just bobbing around like we've been saying. And they think a lot of this too, because of the heavy osteoderms or armor on the back of these ankylosaurs, that's like once you're flipped, you're fucked. Like you're done. Like you're dead or alive, you're fucked. And so then again, so bloating, right? All these gases and whatnot, which also causes you to be more unstable and more likely to float and flip, supposedly. And then once that degassing occurs, either by natural processes or something punctures you, you will then actually sink to the bottom of a channel, maybe a river channel, or again, marine sediments. And part of this is they're like, we find so many fucking ankylosaurs in marine sediments. Were they just like really into an ocean view? Or is this a taphonomic process that their bodies are just more inclined to just be out to sea because they're already kind of like this little upside down boat, like ready to go. So that was the setup.
Okay.
That was just the setup.
That's a
let
setup.
alone
Okay.
any of their. It was freaking amazing. So they decided to focus on, first off, I should probably also define, we're going to talk about two types of ankylosaurs. Ankylosaur is a more general group. Ankylosaurids are the ones that are like the classic whackety whack with like a tail club. They're the ones that have the junk on the tail that smackety smacks. And then we also have the nodosaurids. And those are ankylosaurs that just had a basic bitch dinosaur tail. No frills, no whistles, none of that. And it actually matters. It matters. They talk about this a lot. Go really into the tail, like a lot.
Interesting.
I'd love to hear Carrie Weber's thoughts on these tails.
Part that I would have assumed mattered for this, but okay, sure.
It comes up a lot. Yeah, it is. Anyway, so they focus on these Alberta dinosaurs, ankylosaurs, partly because that's where Sternberg and others made this observation. Also because the ones that we find in Asia are more inland deposits and they don't seem to be found belly up as much. They're preserved upright. So that's another reason that they wanted to be looking at North American deposits where they have been found upside down so much. So they were able to actually determine the original orientation for 36 specimens and came out with that, yes, 70% of them were found upside down, which is statistically significant, turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they looked at the entire organism, but sometimes they'd also just use skulls, the hips, and tail clubs, because all of these are some chonky motherfucking dinosaurs. And so these larger parts of their bodies are going to be, they were the least subject to being overturned just by like river flow and channel. And so if these elements are flipped, they're saying that that's how they were deposited and not flipped later by like the flow or something like that of water. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if it was like a rib, that could have just been like...
You have a streamlining issue here where the question has to be, did they flip upside down because they were floating, or is that how water would naturally flip things because water likes to sort things like ichthyosaur vertebrae?
Right. Yes. Bodies matter. Like what your body looks like during life and death really can affect this shit. So we're going to go into some of that, because the way they tested the bloat and float, like, again, fucking tears. Like, I was so entertained. So they decide, they're like, okay, we have shown first part, we have support that ankylosaurs in North America preserve on their backs. Okay, so why? So they had 4 hypotheses that they were testing around this. And the first two, the first one is just so stupid. Okay. So actually, I don't think it's that stupid. I think it's actually kind of hard to measure this, which they kind of they avoided it. So the first hypothesis is the clumsy ankylosaur model.
Oops, I tripped and I fell on my back. Okay.
Oops, I tripped and I fell into the ocean and I can't right myself because I'm shaped like a boat and I can't flip back up.
Okay.
So they've maintained, so there is a hypothesis from Nupska, who we've talked about. He's the incredibly bipolar Romanian Albanian paleontologist that I like lose my shit for. He said that ankylosaurs were subject to accidental overturning, perhaps as a result of tumbling down a hill where they lay to die. So this whole part is, it's not like the bloating that's causing them to flip necessarily. It's that they're dumb and they have stupid bodies. And so this is kind of like when we talked about if they were migrating or not. And you look at an ankylosaur and you're like, that motherfucker is not migrating anywhere. Like it's just not happening. It's just like stupid fucking coffee table body. So they discounted this, which I don't know if I buy this.
It just seems hard to roll over. Like, they're wide. Well, it just seems hard to get it to roll over in the first place. So,
but if it did, from, tripping down a hill, as Nopska observed. Right, and so they compare it to turtles, but turtles are able to right themselves more often than not. So they were like, no, this implies that ankylosaurs were especially clumsy, which goes against their long-lived success of over a period of 100 million years. So they can't be so clumsy because their evolution...
You can be clumsy and just fuck a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can totally get your fuck on and be a total weirdo.
As long as you have a lot of babies, it doesn't matter.
Like, I'm like, who says clumsiness is a deterrent to fucking? Right. What if you were two clumsy ankylosaurs and you just fell into each other? It was like, oh no. Bam, babies.
That's how sex works from a woman who's had a baby.
I tripped and fell. And then it happened. Okay. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'd like to be. I'd like to watch this. This would be fucking hilarious. Yeah. Right. So anyway, I also, like, as you know, hate pandas. And like, if we want to talk about worthless animals that are still alive that can't even figure out how to have sex, look no further than the fucking panda bear. Pandas. So to just be like, oh, you can't be... If you're clumsy, that means you can't be evolutionary successful, I think is a non-starter. I think that's a logical fallacy. And I agree that it's very hard to be able to test this model. And I wasn't super happy with how they tried to just be like, nah, they lived for too long to have been that clumsy. I'm like, have you watched Teen Mom? Have you seen 16-year-olds raising babies? You don't have to be like sophisticated and intelligent to have offspring. So... I am also evidence of this. I am clumsy. That's how Tracy was born. Okay. So they discount that. We just fell down this hill one day.
Yeah.
Fell down a hill. Okay, so the second one is carnivore activity. So essentially that this is also a Nobska idea, that they were flipped over by big carnivores, and that then, because they needed to expose their little tender underbellies to be eaten. So they went and they looked for carnivore bite marks, and they were not found on a significant number of the specimens. So that one got discounted. And the main one that they focused on today is bloat and float. So the bloat and float hypothesis, again, means that they died. They get bloated from that degassing of their death, and then they fall into or get associated into some sort of river waterway that takes them either to a deep river or a big ocean kind of thing, where they then are deposited with either fluvial, so river deposits, or like marine deposits. And so they think that they predicted that an ankylosaur carcass in particular would be incredibly unstable in water, me as well, particularly when bloated, reflected by an increased offset between the centers of mass and buoyancy. And then they decided to do computer modeling to show this.
Oh God.
It is so great. Like essentially
ankylosaurs, they're putting big armor things on turtles. How are they determining this? But okay.
I really wanted them to make an ankylosaur model and throw it into a river. Like, I really wanted that. I think it's calling for that because even they say at the end that, sure, we got some significant results from this. However, it's based on estimates for reconstructing a body that we don't actually know, and we don't have, like, all we have are bones. That doesn't necessarily tell you how an animal's musculature was or where it was a chonky badonkadonk versus not. And they acknowledge that there's only so much you can do with this computer modeling. But they did 3-dimensional digital models of both a nodosaurid and an ankylosaurid to look at the stability of ankylosaurs floating in water. And they did all of this by basing it on a variety of floating and sometimes sinking models of living forms, including American alligators, elephants, horses, giraffes, sea turtles, and penguins, which they were, and then they chose those 2 particular ankylosaur species because their bow plans are relatively representative of their respective families. So then they went ahead and they plugged all this into these different computer models with different density of freshwater versus saltwater and like different just current flows and different body size dimensions, tail club versus a naked tail. And we're able to determine that, yes, they flipped much faster when they were bloated. And that means I'm actually going to show you my picture. Isn't it fucking awesome? Computer modeling. Like they literally were measuring like the density of ossicles, like their osteoderms, like to be able to measure this and to play with these models. So would you like to describe what you're seeing?
Sure. All right. So what I'm seeing is a 4-paneled figure. And on the top, we have an ankylosaur with a name that I'm not even going to, there's so many vowels. Absolutely not. Starts with an E. And on the bottom, we have
Euoplocephalus. Yeah, something like that.
There's no
Euoplocephalus, I think.
Yeah, okay. It's like Euro, but if you just got rid of the R. And then you have Sauropoda on the bottom, which is a nodosaur and has no armor on its tail. And so on the left-hand side, they have both profiles from above and from the side of these animals. On the left-hand side as if they're not bloated, and then on the right-hand side as if they are bloated, where it looks like they've just stretched the model out, which is pretty funny. Especially since they basically they become more, the art style is low poly, where you have polygons making up your 3-dimensional body, and then your body gets bigger and then just has fewer polygons. That's bloated is just a fat, low poly version of the original version.
It is 115% of the body local circumferences were for the bloated versus non-bloated, and the factor of 15 comes from observations of that amount of distension observed in dead African elephants. Wow, sorry, not elements. Elephants. Yes. So, I mean, again, subjective based on a mammal that doesn't have a shit ton of body armor all over it.
Yeah.
Also, just, you know, a reptile versus a mammal. Regardless, though, they found pretty strong support that ankylosaurs are unstable in the water. I mean, me too. I'm relating again. I'm projecting. I'm just.
Yeah. Which ankylosaur are you today?
Sometimes you're the bloated ankylosaur, sometimes you're the non-bloated ankylosaur. And so it turns out that the nodosaurs end up flipping way more. They're more prone to flippage.
They don't have an anchor.
Which is reflected in the... Yes, exactly. It's fucking with, again, just how this ship sails through the water and not having this heavy dragging it down thing that helps keep it lowered. And so, yeah, they found that both bloated and non-bloated ankylosaurs are pretty unstable in water, which does make me go back to the clumsy hypothesis. So you're telling me that they could just fall into the water alive and still flip over and die without, like, the bloating part of it. It does seem like they don't need to be bloated to flip. It certainly helps. So I do think that there's still some room for some clumsy motherfucking ankylosaurs, but that's just me. And then again, they found statistical evidence support for the nodosaurids flipping a lot more and being found in that position. Again, because they're essentially just clasts moving through a substrate, and they're at the whim and the will of the constraints of that water in their bodies. Yeah, exactly. So if you want to be preserved belly up, put on a backpack. Put on a nice big backpack and then jump into the ocean.
Such a specific want, but okay. But make sure you don't have heavy shoes.
Or a tail. Or a tail. So they found quite a bit of support for this computer simulated cow tipping, which is what I'm calling it. And they did have one other hypothesis that they also investigated that is just super unhinged. And I'm not entirely sure why they included it because, well, it's funny what they did. It's not super, like... It's not a classic experiment. So anyway, the fourth hypothesis, the fourth and final, is the armadillo roadkill hypothesis, which just is all about how, a modern animal that is armored, the armadillo, when it dies, if it's on its side or whatever, it's going to roll over as it bloats from degassing on that perfect little tippy shell, they wobble, but they don't fall down. And so they were like, okay, so is that what's going on? That it's because of this armor that once they get gassy as they're dead, their bodies just naturally go bloop. Which again would then say, so maybe the reason they're in marine sediments is because they all had beach houses. So again, like the context still matters because the armadillo roadkill model does not need them to be transported by water in any way to explain why they're found belly up. And so they tested this prediction by the authors just over a couple of 3 months in 2016. Anytime that they were driving around Georgia and they saw a dead armadillo, they got out and they looked at it.
I love science. I break for armadillos for my research purposes.
I have to hit this armadillo for my research purposes. Obviously, you're going to have some sampling bias when that's the way you're gathering your data. I wondered, if you were in a rush, did you stop? Like, I was on a way to a wedding, and then I saw this armadillo dead on the road, and I was like, I gotta stop and touch it and take pictures of it. No, you didn't do that, you sick psycho. So, how many times did you stop when it was at night, blah, 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 blah. And so, I mean, it's very funny. They were like, we don't really have too much strong evidence for the armadillo hypothesis. But again, I wasn't super happy with how they actually went about testing it, but they didn't find that armadillos that they were seeing on the side of the road in Georgia were actually consistently found belly up. So that didn't have the same support that we see in ankylosaurs. And the only thing I kind of want to say about it is it was really funny because they were like, one of the reasons why this although armadillos and ankylosaurs are similar in sharing a rotund body, rude, and heavily armored dorsum, the appreciable differences between them should nevertheless provide reason to doubt the comparison, because ankylosaurs are so much bigger and heavier than armadillos. And since we don't have a giant, since you can't compare them body size wise, they're a bad proxy. But then at the end of the paper, the last part of the paper, the very final part of the paper, is they go, hey, you might want to use this idea in glyptodonts, because glyptodonts have also been hypothesized to be bloat and float. And I'm like, glyptodonts are giant fucking armadillos. You do have a giant armadillo. So that was my only, you know what? I'm glad they went down the armadillo rabbit hole. It was entertaining. Obviously, I think there's another research paper or 2 or 3 to be done from there. And obviously the bulk of this literally was on these computer simulated tipping ankylosaurs, and it was so fucking funny. So yes, there is really strong support that ankylosaurs did indeed get preserved on their back more often than not when they're found in watery environments and not like a fucking desert. And 2, it seems that the process that is leading to this is that they are dying, getting really bloated and gross, flipping onto their back, and then fucking sinking like a drop stone. And that is your classic Bloat and Float Dinosaur Edition. You're welcome.
Amazing. That is fucking, I mean, that's this podcast. Subtitle, fucking disgusting.
Also, if you don't want to sink, get a tail club. Just saying.
Yeah.
Or don't want to flip as much, get a tail club.
Don't go into the ocean with a backpack. There's a lot of things you could do to avoid being preserved upside down, but you have to be really specific about it because you're not an ankylosaur. That's really interesting. Yeah. Just the idea of pulling over for roadkill to double check what side it was preserved on is top 10 science.
Thank you for listening. If you liked the podcast, be sure to rate and review us on your listening platform of choice. We really, really, really appreciate it.
If you'd like to hear more and support the show, follow us on Patreon for some exclusive bits or on our various social media platforms. You can follow Amy on Instagram at Mary Anning's Revenge.
And Megan on Instagram and TikTok as Geopetal Fabric, or both of us at Weird and Dead on Instagram and TikTok.
You can purchase Weird and Dead merchandise at geopetalfabric.com and get a copy of Amy's new book, The Fossil Keeper's Treasure, at all major book retailers.
Our theme song is Unlock Me by Prazkanal.
This podcast has been hosted by and researched by us, Amy Atwater and Megan Wetherill. Thank you so much for listening. Also, this content is not for children, unlike Amy's new book, which is great, and you should go buy a copy.
Please.
Just the saddest little please.